This being Father's Day, I want to invite you to turn your Bibles to Psalm 127, as this passage, though not addressing fathers in particular, speaks powerfully about the subject of the family. So follow me, please. Psalm 127, and I will read the 5 passages in this psalm. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a mighty warrior, so are the children of one's youth. And happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. Now, there are 3 or 4 points that we can draw from this psalm that have strong application for us today in the realm of family and parenting. The first point speaks to the foundation of the home. The psalmist says it again this way: unless the Lord builds your house, you labor in vain to build it. Matthew 7, Jesus tells the story of a wise man and a foolish man. And he defines them this way, that the wise man built his house upon a foundation of stone, of rock. The foolish man was described as being foolish because he built his house upon a foundation of sand. And when the storm came, the wise man's house stood because of the foundation of rock, while the foolish man's house was totally destroyed because of the sand foundation. These stories, of course, symbolize families. And families who build their homes upon the foundation of God's truth, His love, and His Word, in contrast to families who do not. But as I've thought through this concept, there really is a third type of foundation. And that's the foundation that is built upon the rock initially, but then the foundation begins to slip, to slide. When Pam and I were in our early 30s, when our kids were little bitty, in fact, we were younger than that, in our mid to late 20s, we were doing some mission work in the North Dallas area, and we leased a duplex while we were there. Well, I remember that when the lady was showing us the duplex, I noticed that there were large cracks running in the walls in different rooms of the duplex. After a few minutes, I asked her about that. I said, these seem to be not only large cracks, but they seem to be in every room. And she said, yes, I was going to address that. She said, the cracks in the walls usually signify that the foundation has slipped. If you were going to purchase this, it would be a big problem, because repairing a foundation is costly. But just leasing it, you should be okay. When a foundation slips, cracks form in the walls of the home. You can imagine a couple, individually strong believers, desiring to build a godly family. And so they stand before a minister on the day of their wedding, and they make vows to one another. And the vows are something like this: I promise that I'm going to love you, and I'm going to serve God in our home, and together we're going to build a godly home. But then over time, that same couple begins to see cracks forming in the walls of their home. Maybe they start in the den or the living room, the area where the family generally gathers. And they begin to see that problems are developing in the family dynamic, in the conversation and communication, and just in the relationship within the family. We follow that home, and their cracks are then seen in the kitchen, and then in the children's rooms, and in the master bedroom, where cracks again defined by the foundation of that home slipping, moving. It can happen to any one of us, and it can happen at any time, and it can be devastating and disastrous if indeed ignored and left unchecked. What about you? What do the walls indicate in your home? Are cracks developing? Are you just ignoring them? Cracks of a sliding, shifting foundation? A new pastor went to kind of an uppity new church, and he made the decision that he was going to visit every congregant in that church. And so he knocked on the door of every home, and he entered asking this one question time and time again. He asked the question simply, tell me please, does Jesus live here? He got a varied group of answers. One man said, well, Pastor, you may not know this, but I'm a deacon in this church. I've served this church for many years as a deacon. And the pastor said, well, that's fine, but that's not the question that I ask you. I ask you, does Jesus live in your home? Another would say, Pastor, I know you're new in our community, but I am a very well-respected businessman here. People know me, and people respect me, and people honor me. Why are you asking me such a question, sir? I only want to know, does Jesus live here? The foundation of our home. Secondly, the fight for our home. Because the Lord continues, unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Now, what is a city other than a collection of homes? And the watchman here is described as one who would give watch care over the homes and the city. This portrays the fact that our homes have enemies that are out to destroy us. And therefore, we need a watchman. We need the Lord being the protector of our home. The psalmist is implying that there are enemies of our homes and our families. Unless the Lord guards the city. This term guard comes from the world of horticulture, and it is defined as tending a garden. Here, the one who guards the city can be described as doing the work of a gardener. Now, what does a gardener do? Well, he tills the soil. He makes the ground ready to receive the seed. He plants the seed and nourishes the seed. He gives the seed and the ground whatever it needs that it might grow and produce fruit. But also, the gardener pulls the weeds that grow up in and around that seed in the garden that would seek to steal nutrients from the seed. Simply, the one who guards, like the gardener, is to do all in order to protect the precious commodity of the home and the family. Now, I can't even imagine anyone denying that there has been and currently is a progressive eroding of the historic Judeo-Christian traditional values in our country. I mean, you're either blind, ignorant, or an unbeliever with a seared conscience. This being Father's Day, I found an article that identified the different popular television dads over the years. In other words, the 1950s, Jim Anderson of the show Father Knows Best was America's dad. In the 1960s, Stephen Douglas, you remember him? Of My Three Sons, was kind of the TV dad. In the early 1970s, it was old Mike Brady of the Brady Bunch that stood out as the popular TV dad. In the late 70s, Archie Bunker took the pedestal on being a popular TV dad. In the late 1980s, Dan Connor became the TV dad. In the 1990s or late 1990s, Homer Simpson stood as the TV dad of the show The Simpsons. In the 2000s, Tony Soprano took the lead role in The Sopranos as America's TV dad. And in 2010 and following, Bob Belcher of Bob's Burgers became the TV dad. Now, I had to look up Bob Belcher. I never heard of him, didn't know anything of Bob's Burgers, the show, but I discovered that Bob Belcher, though married with 2 children, is a bisexual, mostly disrespected by his family, and he owns some kind of a burger joint, standing today as a very popular TV father. So we've gone all the way from Jim Anderson and Father Knows Best to Bob Belcher, the admitted bisexual, disrespected father of 2 children and owner of Bob's Burger Barn. Yeah. If television reflects the culture, we're in trouble. It reminds me of a story that I read of a little boy, 10 years old, in some unnamed Florida countryside. The little boy went out swimming in a pond just behind his house, something he had done numerous times. And his mother, though busy with chores, but checking on her son, suddenly heard screams and cries coming from her boy. She ran outside and ran toward the pond, and there she saw her son out in actually nearer the edge of the pond, screaming because an alligator had bitten hold of his leg. The mother jumped down into the water and she grabbed his arms, and a tug-of-war ensued. The mother trying to bring her son to the dry land and save his life, while the alligator had his legs trying to drag him into the deep water so he could have him. And finally help came and the little boy was saved. But the imagery there is unmistakable. Parents today and grandparents of grandchildren are in an intense tug-of-war with the alligators of this world. The alligators of this world and this culture that desire our children's lives and will attack at every turn. Will take every opportunity, look for every sign of weakness at school, in their headphones, in the movies, online, every opportunity to bite down and take hold of our children and grandchildren and take them into the deep. And parents, especially Christian parents, are grabbing hold and hanging on with every ounce of strength they can muster in this violent tug-of-war with the alligators of our culture. The fight for the family. Finally, or next, the focus the focus of the family. Verse 2, it is vain for you to rise up early, sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for he gives his beloved sleep. This passage speaks of the focus of the home, of parents' priorities. Now listen carefully, please. It speaks of parents' priorities. You know, it's been said that in the early years of a parent's life or a person's life, that a man will spend his health trying to gain wealth. And then in the later years of his life, a man will spend his wealth trying to regain his health. We have to see the reality and the truth before it's too late. That there is nothing in this world, nothing attached to this world that means more, is more vital and important. There is nothing of this world's treasures that mean as much as our children. There is no greater calling that you have as a parent than your children. There is nothing more important to the heart of God than your sons and daughters. Glenn Adsett was a missionary to China. And he had several years of time spent ministering to the Chinese people. But then one day that fearful, dreaded knock came, and Glenn Adsett was arrested by the Chinese government. He was therefore put on house arrest, could not leave his home, and he stayed in those circumstances for a number of days. Finally, representatives from the Chinese government came to his home and told Glenn, who had his wife and 2 daughters there with him, told them that they were being allowed to return back to the States. Well, that brought great joy to them, knowing what could have happened. And as they began to make plans then to return back to the United States, they were given this restriction that they could only take with them, husband and wife could only take with them 200 pounds total of their stuff. Everything else would have to be left behind. And so Glenn sat down with his wife and 2 children, and they began to try to discuss the priorities of what they would take back to the States with them. And of course, every individual had their own ideas of what was important to take back. And so Glenn finally set a big scale there in the middle of his room, and they, as a family, began to make these decisions about what they would take home with them. Finally, the day arrived when they were to be taken to the airport and transferred back to the United States. And Glenn said, well, we are ready. Finally, we've got our 200-pound limit prepared. And as one of the security personnel of the Chinese government began to look around, he said to Glenn, he said, have you weighed your children? And Glenn said, no. The 200 pounds does not include our daughters? And the man replied, then you plan on leaving them here? And Glenn said, absolutely not. And so he walked over to that basket, that bag full of their treasures, and he turned it upside down and said, there is nothing in this world more important to me than my children and my family. Finally, the fruit of the home, where the psalmist speaks about their children. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of his womb is a reward. Like arrows are in the hands of a mighty warrior, so are the children in one's youth. I know our time is completely gone. In fact, we're starting on backward time. Let me just say this. Here, the Bible likens children to arrows. Now, an arrow doesn't just appear. I mean, there aren't arrow bushes. There aren't arrow trees. You can't just go and pick an arrow out of the air. An arrow is a common plain stick that someone has spent a lot of time carving and making, that it might be this sleek, usable tool in the hands of a warrior. Someone with great skill has taken the time and made the sacrifice and paid the price to hone that knotty, plain stick into a perfectly balanced tool for the warrior. Well, as arrows are in the hands of a mighty warrior, so are our children. It takes a lot of work. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of time involved in training up our sons and daughters in the ways of the Lord. But there is nothing more important. There is nothing more precious unto the Lord. And there is nothing of higher calling and priority than parents, grandparents, honing our sons and daughters into holy, righteous children. Wayne Watson was a Christian artist of recent days and days gone by. And he sang this one song called Watercolored Ponies. And the story is that he was sitting in his kitchen one time and looked on the refrigerator. And you know how we as parents put our kids' colorings and drawings up on the refrigerator. And there were two little horse-shaped watercolored pictures that his two little boys had drawn. Watercolored ponies. And the point of the song is, and he sang it this way, that one day those watercolored ponies would ride away. The time we have with our kids, particularly the time we have of influence upon them is so brief. It is so short. It may not seem like it as you're going through it, and I know it doesn't. But on the backside, it is a snap of the finger, and it is gone. So vital is our call to stand strong in the gap during the time of our children's childhoods, because they grow up and those watercolored ponies will ride away.